friend of mine was kind enough to lend me. It's called Silence by Shusaku Endo. Silence is basically an account of a Portuguese Jesuit missionary in Japan during the 1600s, when Christianity was outlawed and all known Christians were persecuted. I think the main, somewhat obvious reason it came to be outlawed was the Japanese fear of giving away its power to something foreign, especially at a time when Western civilization and Western powers were growing, especially in the area of trade. So the book starts out mentioning the fact that a very well reputed and respected missionary, Father Cristobal Ferreira, has apostatized, which basically means he renounced his faith after being tortured in Japan. Three of his mentees, upon hearing this, become determined to find out what truly happened, and so they set out for Japan, regardless of the church's reluctance to send any more priests to such a dangerous place. So the three priests are Fathers Garp, Santa Marta, and Rodriguez. Their sea journey is perilous, to say the least, full of storms and such trials, to the point that one of them, Santa Marta, becomes gravely ill that he cannot continue further. And so the two priests, Garp and Rodriguez, end up braving the remainder of the route to Japan. The story is mostly written in the form of Rodriguez's journal, or letters, you could say, of what was happening as it was happening. So the two priests meet their first Japanese en route their last ship to Japan from China, and until now I still don't really understand the point of this particular character. His name is Kichijiro. He's depicted as pathetic, weak, cowardly, shameless drunk who clearly cannot be trusted, and yet the two priests don't really have much of a choice. Surprisingly, once they arrive in Japan, Kichijiro does act on his promise to deliver them to a community of Japanese Christians, or as they were called, the hidden Christians, since they were practicing Christianity in secret, who warmly welcome the priests, and they feed them daily because they're so grateful for having them in the village to perform rites that can only be performed by them, like baptisms and communion, since they're authorized members of the church or the Society of Jesus. As time progresses, Garp and Rodriguez know that their days are numbered and that they're going to be caught eventually, especially with the monetary rewards that were being given out to those who informed the authorities about any hiding Christians, be they priests or laymen. Eventually they do get told on, and so they attempt to make an escape by parting ways, but then the Japanese Christians they have come to love and cherish get caught, tortured to death, and Rodriguez ends up witnessing Garp dying while trying to save them. And so calling it like a test of faith, it would be an understatement, especially with what else he had in store for him. Rodriguez keeps running, but somehow he's still found by Kichijiro, who it turns out has actually apostatized to save his life, and then he begs for Father Rodriguez's forgiveness, who forgives him since it's practically his job. However, Kichijiro does end up selling him to the authorities, which is when the comparison of Kichijiro's character to Judas becomes prominent. Once Rodriguez gets captured, he is so exhausted from running away and hiding that this capture almost comes with a sense of relief, and yet an even harder struggle begins to develop within him internally. And this inner turmoil just increases in intensity day by day. So the remainder of the book after that is pretty much, as I mentioned, the inner turmoil more than anything that Father Rodriguez endures stoically, I must say, by trying as hard as he can to remain steadfast in his beliefs, no matter how shaken and slightly, doubtful he becomes. Many times his faith wanes as he questions God's silence at the unjustness of what's happening. I think one of the most gripping techniques Shusaku Endo executes with mastery is the anticipation he builds up leading to the meeting with a character called Inoue. Ever since before the priest arrived in Japan, he's already heard of this extremely wicked and heartless magistrate who is basically the mastermind behind the Christian persecution. And so Father Rodriguez expects to be, subjected to the worst physical torture ever once he's aware that he's finally under the mercy of Inoue. But the moment that he meets him in person, which was one of my favorite scenes in the book, is completely anticlimactic in the sense that Father Rodriguez has this expectation of a cold, calculating, and cruel man who's basically evil incarnate. And yet, the person standing before him, who's Inoue, is an old man who seems totally sympathetic to the priest's sentiments and, in fact, nods and smiles warmly at him. As the story progresses, the idea that gets drilled into Rodriguez's head is the image of a Japan whose soil is so unfertile that Christianity simply cannot grow and blossom there, and that the issue lies in the soil itself. By the time Inoue brings Ferreira into the picture, the whole point of Rodriguez's journey into Japan, Ferreira, Rodriguez is already by that time kind of a different person in the sense that he's become so hardened by his suffering, and yet even despite of that, what his former mentor Ferreira ends up saying to him in efforts to convince him to apostatize are things that Father Rodriguez would have never imagined to come from Ferreira's mouth, and it really stirs him up. So he becomes even more jaded after his meeting with his lifelong mentor, only to see him reduced to the, disbeliever, you could say, that he's become now. Another one of my favorite scenes, and this one's a bit too dark, again, massive kudos to Endo, is when Father Rodriguez is transported to yet another, even smaller prison cell than the one he was in before. The first night at which he has this extremely human moment where the irony of life strikes him so hard that in the midst of his suffering he actually laughs out loud. And yet another instance is when he laughs because he thinks he hears the guards snoring noises. He pictures them having drunk themselves to sleep, when in reality the noises are actually the groaning sounds of the Christians suffering in the pit. To explain the pit, I'll just read out a passage from the book. It's called the pit. You've probably heard about it. They bind you in such a way that you can move neither hands nor feet, and then they hang you upside down in a pit. These little openings are made behind the ears so that you won't die immediately. The blood trickles out drop by drop. It's a torture invented by the magistrate Inoue. End quote. So you get the picture. In the end, Father Rodriguez does end up apostatizing as he is given an ultimatum between him doing so or allowing Japanese Christians' lives to perish under torture. He kind of has this vision where he kind of hears a voice, presumably Jesus, who tells him to trample on the image of him. Throughout the entire novel, Kichijiro relentlessly finds his way to Rodriguez, chasing him down even in prison, begging for his absolution even after the priest apostatizes. Come to think of it, I believe that maybe the character of Kichijiro symbolizes Christianity's message of redemption, in that no matter how far astray you've gone, God's love and forgiveness is boundless. And so I think Rodriguez is put in that position where he becomes so transcendent in his spiritual enlightenment that he almost ceases to harbor any resentment or hatred towards Kijijiro for his betrayals. And he just, he gives him what he asks for. Now, going to the one of the discussion questions at the end of the book, one question reads, while still in Macau, Rodriguez is told that Inoue, quite unlike his predecessor Takenaka, was as cunning as a serpent, so that the Christians who until now had not flinched at threats and tortures succumbed one by one to his cunning wiles. What makes Inoue's style of persecution so effective? Does the fact that Inoue was once baptized affect his actions? So I believe that yes, the fact that he was once baptized gives him maybe an added advantage in a way, in the sense that he has inside knowledge about Christianity and its modus operandi, and yet I think why his style of persecution is so different from others is because his chosen method is more of an intellectual approach, where he's really persuasive, especially when he talks to the priests about how the God that the Christians in Japan believe in is actually like not the same Christian God the priests believe in, or the idea that the God that's in their head is completely distorted. It's like a skeleton of the God that the missionaries preach about. And so in this way, he sets it up for failure and says that, it's completely useless and that it's not going to thrive here, this Christianity. And he says all kinds of things about how the country is just, it's not compatible. It's not compatible. He goes as far as to compare or liken the whole, Christian missionary effort in Japan. He compares it to the persistent affection of an ugly woman, calling it barren and saying that, such a woman doesn't have the capacity to be a wife, meaning that Christianity is basically not wanted here, neither is there any home for it here. All in all, it's a great literary work for those into historical theological fiction. I would rate the book a 5 out of 5 stars. That's it from me, folks. Until next time, happy reading!